um, if you want the consumers slicing uh, you'll have consumers which are thinking of sustainability as being the primary goal, and consumers that, because of the needs of business or individual choice, they're going to say, I want it now, right? I want it in the next few hours. And that allows the segmentation of the consumers without forcing them to fit in one of the two models, all of them to fit in one.
Or yeah, for this particular order, I need it now. For other things that are more on
Sure.
my list of things that I want to replenish, I'm okay. Let's take the lowest carbon footprint route, something of that order. And I think it's the decision making is getting down to that order level, and being able to um, postpone the ultimate decision until the moment of truth, right?
Yep. And actually, they also probably project the load of the truck, how many parcels they have to deliver in a certain destination or direction, so they can drop them around the route. So they create the route dynamically as a result.
Yep.
I'll give you another example. Fast fashion industry. It goes hundreds of times before it becomes a landfill problem. People don't buy it and don't wear it. But I'm going to go on the front end of this and how you create the samples. And it has hundreds of trips, or tens or hundreds of trips between different parts of the ecosystem. One places the buttons, one place, selects the pattern one, and so on. So they have to go through all this process a few times until there is a sample even for pre-sales.
Right, right.
So,
Um,
but
I wanted to get to
go ahead.
I wanted to get to one more, I'll call it big dot. So we've got
Okay.
process dot, performance dot, and that's the whole idea around practices, best practices or leading practices. And again, there's a lot of practices listed within the SCOR model. One of the categories is sustainable supply chain management. And
Okay.
then underneath that is simply a list of all of the process practices that would contribute towards a more sustainable supply chain. Not everybody has to do every practice, so it's not the most practices wins, but just to give you again referentially, there was a grouping of all of the practices by sustainable. You can also find the same thing for risk, reverse logistics, all of the practices that would, support or be listed in that category.
And
So,
by the way, yeah, that's very compelling, actually. So if, let's say, I'm in charge of introducing sport into a large multinational. How do I use these practices to, I hope it's not too big of a challenge, but how do I use these practices for a quick learning and quick application? Because if you are in an executive position, you have probably, few hours before the meeting to say what I'm going to say, how I'm going to support the idea of sustainability, right?
oh man.
Sorry, we can skip it.
Yeah, so there couple of things. I know at an executive standpoint, um, SCORE is an engineering tool.
Okay,
So I think an executive that says, "Hey, I want to adopt SCORE as my language of choice,"
okay,
doesn't need to speak it, though it's always helpful, you know.
sure.
Um, and so I'm not sure that I've ever seen an executive dwell in the model ahead of a presentation and then use SCORE to win the day. So I think more important, I think, is the engineering piece that says, look, as I think about my long range business plan and I'm thinking about, 27 to 29, and I know I have these big things that I have to deliver to my shareholders. how do I make my supply chain more efficient and effective at the same time? Part of that means I need to be able to support the achievement of our sustainability goals using the processes, performance, and practices that are innate, within the model. I think that's the
Okay.
30-second elevator speech.
No,
Then
it's an excellent point, and I'll tell you why, because that places the score actually in in a very powerful position. Is
yeah,
the infrastructure, right? Is the
mhm.
basement of building the strategy, right? As
Right.
opposed to be a strategy development tool, which usually floats on. In I don't want, no pun intended, but it floats in the clouds.
Well, it's certainly, again, most people that are use the model to make an impact. Again, at the end of the day, the organization does not need to speak SCOR. That's not a requirement. But there
I
are
see.
engineers who are constructing, the things that are going to change in their long-range business plan that have used SCOR, to put together that list of changes. And are able to demonstrate the impact of those changes on performance. So,
And I can see how this connects with other tools like
yeah,
Pestle, right?
yeah,
Analytic tool for strategy. The strength weakness tool, right?
yep.
Uh, the SWOT, strength
Balanced
weakness,
scorecard fits well.
balance.
Lean
So
Six Sigma.
this is
Yeah.
again you bringing back the foundation, and you can use this perspective if you want, this data, this view, this orchestration inside this other strategy development tools environment.
Yep. Yep. So that is again, when you think about the big dots to connect, kind of supply
We
chain with,
didn't finish with the dots.
we have finished with the dots. So there's the big
Uh,
dot of process, the big dot of performance, the
I'll
big dot
build
of practice.
I'll build layers on top of the dot.
Oh, gosh, right.
So
Yeah, you get smaller dots and smaller dots, right?
I would say it's maybe a different perspective of the current dot you have. So if you look at orchestration, and you said it number of times today and in the discussion, but you have to base everything in data acquisition, data processing, and so on. So under these big dots, you have dots, as you said, smaller dots like
Yes.
AI, like data acquisition, and so on, which are sort of the materials you build the foundation. There are the elements you build the foundation.
And I think again, if we just go back to data, information, and technology, I think there are AI applications inside of planning systems, inside of ERP systems, because those solution providers are bringing AI tools forward. I think there's that bucket. Then I think there's the AI capabilities in terms of how do you build data structures within your own organization to be able to extract inside data,
Right.
connect the dots on inside data between products and different
Sure.
aspects of your organization, as well as bring in outside data to be able to then benchmark or append. Um, and then there's just AI for personal productivity gain. So how can I use AI properly, to be a more efficient and effective, employee, right? Because again,
Mhm.
those tools and how you use them are game changing.
So when we analyze in AKFI supply chain and the relationship between the supplier, tier one suppliers particularly, and their customers, we identify actually a number of gaps which we can plug them with holes, with spaces which we can plug in with dots, right? With action. One of them is the strategic dimension. And in the strategy dimension, is supply chain industries are different, right? Typically, it's not always the same industry. So you have extraction for minerals, then you have processing, then you have electronic industry at the other end, using them in integrating them in components and so on. So you have a whole supply chain. When you go through this supply chain, you find gaps starting with the strategy. So, what is the problem of minerals? Mining, child labor, forced labor, and so on, poor conditions for safety, uh, destruction of environment or impact on environment. What is the electronic, let's say the iPhone or the smartphone you have in the pocket? What is their strategy? Well, their strategy is different. Their strategy is pretty much on safe usage. The software load on it. These are concerns by social, right? Social concerns. Again, uh, there are concerns about disposal or recycling, or strategies like early early termination, of use, right? People throwing them away after a year or two of usage. So different strategies, different. Now, you ask the supplier to help the mining company, to help the phone company to meet their objectives. But the supplier, if it's a large mining company, also has to report on its own sustainability. So now they have uh, major gaps in what they need to do in order to satisfy their customers, satisfy their stakeholders, and to finish the idea, multiply it by 10, because there are 10 large phone manufacturers and, I don't know, or 5 and 10 large mining companies vying for the same market. So you have a matrix that you have to fill it with the dots.
Right. And I think parallel to that, I worry that people just use the 800-pound gorilla, implementation approach, where we just move the responsibility, up the supply chain or down the supply chain. Same thing happened with inventory.
Mhm.
So I want to take inventory off my book so I look good. Therefore, I want you to hold it. Well, if you
Right.
add the two piles together, it's essentially the same or worse. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that's the challenge in most in US businesses, is how do we work collectively and collaboratively together in an industry to make a difference. Um,
That's the most important two C words, collectively and collaboratively.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've done a lot of work in the organic food space. And again, um, it's how do you work collectively and collaboratively and yet still meet the governmental requirements and regulations to be, considered organic, so that when the consumer, at that moment of truth, picks up your banana or picks up your tomato or, picks up your head of lettuce,
Right.
and it's going to pay more for it. Um, and again, organic produce has the challenge of shelf life more so than others,
Yep.
and how does that impact, sustainability goals? How does it change the nature of where I produce organic produce vis-a-vis where I'm going to, sell it? So
Mhm.
again, every industry has its own set of, again, collective and collaborative challenges to work on.
Absolutely. And for instance, just to sort of put color to the picture, the distributor, right, the supermarket wants it in paper bags, but paper bags are less protective for the produce, time-wise and so on. They less than plastic, right? So now here is just one simple example of requirements that needs exactly the two C's you mentioned, collaboration, and
Well,
they need to. Right.
And so again, let's imagine that, you have a shorter shelf life of what consumers would actually see. I'll buy that one. That one looks good,
Sure.
versus the risk of shorter shelf life and more throwaway waste. Again,
Sure.
secondary markets become an important aspect to that. Tomato's
Part
still
of the
good,
serve.
but I can't
Yeah.
sell it at a premium, so maybe I'm going to go sell it over here. I think
Sure.
again, lots of
Eh,
challenges I think each industry can probably list when they think end to end.
and for creative solutions, right? Let's use this cheaper tomatoes to make tomato soup. Don't throw them away because you don't see the tomato in the tomato soup, hopefully.
Right? Tastes the same or better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wanted to sort of shift the conversation for a moment because
Yeah.
you have inspired SC,
Yeah.
and I wanted to sort of go deeper in what it is and how the platform really works. If you can give us some insight.
Sure. So I am a teacher by trade. And so if you were to pick up my book, Supply Chain Excellence, it actually outlines a very systematic, using a case study, a very systematic way on how an organization um, who had supply chain problems, how they use the SCOR model to help, define, analyze, measure, and improve their supply chain. Right. So it kind of, you know, in a 90-day window, how does an organization do that? And when you think about
Mm-hmm.
the concept of the master black belt back in the Lean Six Sigma days, where you're actually teaching people how to use the methodology on a project,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the role that I play. So
Okay.
as I'm working with organizations to come up with a strategic list of things to improve for their long range business plan, getting to supply chain excellence, it's working with the project team, kind of coming up with that list using SCORE. Um, it is fun, I have to say. So again, you being a professor, again, when you're working with motivated students trying to be excellent, that's there's no other feeling at the end of the day for that. Um, and I think
They
what I'm
are
learning
like batteries in a car, right?
exactly. And what I'm learning and integrating are appropriate use of AI,
Okay.
as part of the analytics, and teaching that. I am helping the organization put in place some AI governance, as they start to think about that one. So kind of some side things. And then the third big one is how do I really use the technology that I have better, and then with those improvement dollars, be able to invest smartly in new tech. And I think when you think about all of that, under all pointed towards, improving growth rate, improving return on invested capital, improving operating margin, and improving inventory turns. When you think about those big shareholder metrics,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where everything is kind of aimed at.
Comes together. Uh, you you mentioned the students, so I distill
Yeah,
my learnings with probably hundreds of students now talking about the particulars of their AI implementation in the companies and the challenges and so on, and the models they need to follow to implement AI. So I came up with two short, not even stories, sentences, right? So the first one, uh, uh, the data, it's actually made by humans for humans. We didn't have AI until, effectively in companies maybe a couple of years ago.
generative AI. So when you think about
Generative
systems,
AI,
yeah, when you think about
not
systems and
analytical
machine logic and all
analytical
that,
tools and so on, right? We had for a long time. But the analytical tools required always a human at the end, right? You won't trust a spreadsheet just because it came from me. You will say what's here, right? What is this number? How it came? So really the data was made by humans for humans, with tools, with systems to help them automate, semi-automate, capture, preserve, and all these good things a spreadsheet can do. But most data is in spreadsheets today. Second thing is companies, large companies. I dealt with multinationals, with global companies. I came up with the sentence that data is everywhere and nowhere to be found because it's they have data. There's no question. They have tons of data, but it's in this system. It's in the finance. It's in HR. It's so when you ask AI, to work on top of that, you pretty much have an AI problem because AI needs clean, uh, verified data, right? So if you want to do audits, for instance, in sustainability, you won't do audit because AI found some, you know, obscure metric in the company and projects it or extrapolates it. So we have still a big hurdle with introducing AI, and this starts with humans. Humans that are concerned that AI is going to replace them is not so fast if you want to use them in processes like in manufacturing and scoring.
I think just to reinforce your point, if we assume, again, let's imagine, one of the skills that people have to get good at is developing a prompt. How do I ask the right question? And aim the question at a data population that could answer it, right? So if you're asking a company specific question in generative AI, it's not going to answer correctly.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So the question is the right prompt with the right data set. And then I think you have to assume that the answer that you get back is 70% wrong, or no, 70% right.
That's right. Yes.
And so this marriage of an experienced professional with, good background knowledge is going to be able to teach or train the AI to get from 70 to 80, 80 to 90, 90 to 100, or 99 or 98. And I think those are the things that we need to be able to put in place, from a continuous improvement standpoint, over time. So
absolutely. So there's the human part. Now, how you ensure the AI has the right data? Because you can train the AI as much as you want. If the data is biased, for instance, data has human biases. If data is biased, it's like you can tell AI, 20 times you're wrong. You shouldn't select people by their name and inferring inferring ethnicity from the name, right?
Right. And that's what I mean. It's important to understand the prompt and then where is the prompt aimed at, right? And then what are all those inherent risks that go with that? But I also go back to, just taking the fear factor away. People need to use it, like Siri or Alexa or any of those other AI tools that are out there. Because I think being fearful of it, again, constrains application and use. And without application and use, you don't gain the improvement cycles.
Surely it's a cycle. But on the other hand, AI, it's also very new. If you look at sustainability in the supply chain, only in the last few years, you had the picture where a company, a supplier, has to deliver much more data to their customer, right? Carbon footprint being a classic example, if you want. Now, what else do you inadvertently or you cannot separate from your data? Well, maybe how much you invested in trucks repairs, if it makes sense, right? Or you can you can reverse engineer from the data, for instance, and infer that the margin of the supplier is 60%, while the industry margin is 30. They say, "Oh, okay, I got you."
I think one of the most interesting, I'll call it, tasks is from an end-to-end standpoint to be able to start to gauge based on a specific supplier source and manufacturing and distribution is to be able to look at miles traveled. And then, and then make some inferences based on, mode and all those kind of things. Again, to me, that would start to help make decisions of where do I, as I start to think about my sustainability goals in the future. And right now I've got my largest product traveling, 16,572 miles, from the time that, I get the first bill of material item arriving from whatever supplier, how do I strategically change that? And then what is the value of that? So
Right. Absolutely. And actually may change completely the way if we put the sustainability, let's call it a priority, if not
right.
being the main objective. If it's a priority, you may actually come up with very different conclusions on how to ship for just in time. You just mentioned just in time, right? So we said the inventory can be on one end or the other, but now you have to transport the inventory from the supplier to the. Are you going to send one piece at a time using FedEx or airlines, or are you going to send, a ship with 1,000 pieces? Yes, it affects inventory, but now sustainability is the main target. So now the ship, the carbon footprint of your piece, it's 1/1,000 or even more in terms of carbon footprint, because the ship is less, has a lot of tonnage, right, or haulage. So it can change completely the dynamic of just in time. All these things that we've owned them years over years, right? And suddenly it's like it's not just in time; it's just minimum carbon.
Or again, with technologies like, printing,
Sure.
you're moving digital things, not moving physical things, right? So, and again, all kinds of quality system and spec related things there. But again, I think there's a lot of innovation on the horizon.
Right, and these trends coalesce, or actually, as you mentioned, they may actually create positive or negative feedbacks in the way we're doing things at the level of supply and suppliers and demand, suppliers and customers, right? And so the future seems to be open, and a lot of things feed in. We talked about tariffs, we talked about sustainability, we talked about AI, we talked about the big dots, and we put a little bit of polka dots on top of them. But I would like to close with a question that actually addresses both the educator and uh, consultant in SCOR, and the promoter of SCOR, if I may say that.
Sure.
What are your advices, or what's your advice for new grad and the people in the middle of the career that says, okay, I want to change. I don't like what I'm doing, or industries change and so on.
Let me start with the new grad, right?
Okay.
Let me start there, right? So I think everybody should assume that you are going to change roles 30 times. Every other year, you're going to be doing something different.
Right.
And really to understand what are those common things amongst all those 30 things. Leadership, communication, technology, AI is going to be part of that. So what are those things that will transcend role, right? So number one, and write that list. The second thing is, what do I want to do first? So if you think about those 30 things as building blocks in terms of your personal domain of expertise, how do I get out of the gate with something first? It doesn't need to be the last, But
Of course, yeah.
how do I start building through experience? So maybe I work in planning for a little bit, but then I want to be in manufacturing. Then I
Sure.
want to work in sustainability somewhere, and then I want to be in quality. And so the question is, how do you start building that learning journey, amongst your myriad of roles? And maybe you're spending some time in marketing or product development or those kinds of things. So don't be so concerned about picking the end job first. Pick something, become an expert at it, and get going. So the same thing, I would go back to the mid-career person who says, I've been working in this thing. I've been working as a manufacturing, manager so long, and I want to do something different. I think the idea is, how do you learn about the rest of the supply chain where you can communicate your experience and what you've learned, and then pick
Also,
and then pick again the next thing, that would leverage your experience and skills, forward. So, for example, moving from, a general supervisor to a scheduler, moving from a scheduler to a distribution manager, moving from and kind of filling out what does my learning journey look like around those two infinity points.
absolutely.
And I think those would be my two pieces of advice.
So if I may use my own
Sure.
images of what you projected, the first thing, don't try to boil the ocean, right? Don't try
No.
to acquire everything at once. Second, do not, uh, you have maybe a career end goal, but don't think there is a straight line between your end goal and the current, especially new grads and people still at the beginning of the career. There is not a straight line between your end goal and the current, excuse me, the current state. And the third one would be everything is transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary is
Yeah.
not one discipline, and that that's essential to be prepared for the changes in the career that you'll necessarily face, either
Yep.
induced by technology, by trends, by sustainability, and so
Well said.
on. So I'd like to close with a very short message to thank you for taking the time today to visit with us, and for our audience to make sure to tune in every week for a new episode of AKFI Actionable ESG Talk series. We will meet topics and people as um, uh, I would say more than adept experts in their fields, and gain new perspective on how to mitigate risk and create value by integrating ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. And I want to give you a special thanks, Peter,
My
for
pleasure.
being
I
such
enjoyed
a
it.
such a flexible guest.
And my best to everybody in the audience.
Thank you so much.